You're back with The Nation. 40 years ago, Norman Kirk's Labour government won the election with the slogan, "It's time." And it was Kirk's time. In his short stint as Prime Minister, he campaigned against nuclear testing in the Pacific. He forged new ground in the settlement of Maori land disputes and fostered a new sense of national identity. He also faced one of the country's biggest economic challenges, the oil crisis of 1973. The New Zealand Fabian Society has organised a conference in Auckland this weekend to remember the man and his legacy. And we have three of the speakers on our programme this morning. Bob Harvey, the former ad man for the Kirk Government, Bob Tizard, a former Labour Minister, and Dr. Margaret Hayward Kirk's former secretary and biographer. Welcome to all of you this morning. If I can start with you, Mr. Harvey, you saw an enormous amount of potential in this man, didn't you?
I was so impressed with him. He was a colossus of a man. I mean, he was pretty big, by the way. He's about 6'2", and he was enormously powerful and charismatic. And I'd come back from America where I'd had a look at election campaigning, and I thought New Zealand just might buy a total campaign. It was forbidden before to do anything. As my friends here will say, we couldn't do anything in New Zealand, we couldn't buy anything. And I thought, we'll do this. And so I went and saw Norman. And I think, Bob, you were there. And so was Arthur Faulkner and Norman Douglas, the father of Roger Douglas. And we sat in a room, I think in the Grand Hotel. We all sat on the beds because we were too paranoid about sitting in any foyers or anything like that. There was nothing there. And I pitched them the idea of an election campaign. I think they were stunned, probably horrified that something could happen like this, with music, with campaign slogans, with bumper stickers, and they bought it. And they fired the advertising agency within a couple of days that had had it for about 20 years in Wellington, and gave me the chance. And I went up to Town Hall because there was a conference there, and just basically presented the idea of an election campaign with Norman at the very heart of it.
Mr. Tizard, you were there as well, but you first met Norman Kirk back in the 50s, didn't you?
Yes, I'd been a candidate in 51. Norm and I were candidates in hopeless seats in 1954. And I was never introduced to Norm. We were just all candidates and we were introduced all around. Yeah. But what impressed me was the way Norm stood up and argued a case against Walter Nash, who was talking about housing as if it only included state housing. Norm had built his own home and made the blocks with which he built his own home. And there he was, up against this formidable person, and logically disagreeing, politely and effectively. And I thought, by God, that joke has got something.
Dr. Hayward, as his private secretary, you would have known him at a different level. You would have seen a very different Norman Kirk.
Definitely. And I must say that when I first went to work it was in the leader of the opposition's office, I was really quite concerned about going there because my father knew Norman Kirk and quite admired him because we lived nearby and watched him build his house. And I thought, do I want to really work for a man who I might find has, you know, politicians? I thought politicians might have feet of clay. So, and I thought, well, I then have to go and resign and tell my father why and stuff. But in fact, I found exactly the opposite. I found that he was really sincere. What he said, he meant. And I think that was seen later when he tried, you know, he marked off everything that he'd promised people in the policy. And also, there was nothing in the office he couldn't do himself. He could type as well as anyone. We had an old Gestetner, you turned the handle to get copies, no photocopying in those days, and he'd come out and do his turn at turning the handle. So we all worked very hard because he worked hard, but he gave a lead. And I just thought it was a very happy office.
And you accredited Mr. Harvey for getting Kirk and getting Labour elected back in 72. And
but we think the campaign that was really great was 69.
Right.
That was with the first with a musical soundtrack that we'd basically got into the public arena before, and then we brought it back and we did the split screen commercial, which kind of knocked out New Zealand the first time. I'm sure Peter Jackson could do it in 10 seconds, but it took us 6 months to do the split screen with Norman going up the stairs to Parliament. We thought that was the campaign that should have won Labour and Norman the job as Prime Minister.
But it was the campaign that was It's Time, wasn't it?
Its time was 72, which
right.
It was a great campaign. And the slogan, of course, It's Time, which we shared with Australia. We came up with it. I think it came out of a speech that I'd heard Arthur Faulkner say, where he said, it's a time for a real change. And I thought, my God, that's great for an advertising campaign. But we didn't go with real change, because I think Norman thought real change was right over the other side. Let's just go with It's Time. And It's Time became, and still is, one of the great slogans.
Mr Tizard and the country agreed that it was time, and he came into power, and he was enormously popular, wasn't he?
He was by then, although the actual survey results leading right up to the 1972 election had us behind, and Norm specifically behind. Yeah. But the real point that I would say, Norm came aware of himself in 1969. We had the Labor candidate for Eden, Professor Keith Sinclair from the Auckland University. And he took Norm into the staff common room at the Auckland University, which I knew well. I'd been on the staff there. And he got into a tangle with the Professor of Economics and the Associate Professor of Economics. And he realised for the first time that he could argue against the experts. Now, up to then, I really felt that he had an inferiority complex that prevented him working enthusiastically with people who had formal education.
He'd been a station engineering driver, and he's a stoker on the ferries, if I remember.
Yeah. But Norm came out of that campaign realising that he was as good as any of them.
And his term began well, didn't it?
Yes,
It did.
but the real difficulties, of course, came later when the physical problems started. If we had won that 69 election, and it was so close, Tom Shan died just after the election. He got a sympathy vote and was re-elected, but we won the by-election that followed in Marlborough. We missed Eden, where Sinclair was the candidate. He won on election night, but the march up Queen Street the day before by the strikers from the ship Wainui turned the vote against him on the official count. And instead of having a margin of 6, the National Party at best would have had 2, and we probably would have won another seat.
Sinclair lost by 3 votes.
Something like that.
Then, really, when things started to become difficult, Dr. Hayward, was, I think, October 1973, when there was the Arabs imposed the oil embargo after the Six-Day War. That's when things started to get a little bit difficult for him, didn't it? Yes,
but I didn't feel it got that difficult for him. It certainly got difficult for everyone in the world, and the price of oil went up, I think, from about $3 a barrel to about 20, so it was a real shock. But then there was the thought of carless days, or at least using buses much more, and certainly Mr Kirk used to come in on the bus in the morning, an early bus. And then we went to Southeast Asia, and while he was there, particularly in Indonesia, we went out to oil wells and we had a look there. And he was all the time quite active, as both of you will know, at looking, it's what you said about housing, looking at different ways of doing things. And he had considerable talks there with the Indonesians, and I think things would have progressed from there as well.
He was a visionary. He wanted to talk to Russia. I remember being in meetings with him with Such, talking about the potential of Russia and China. Both were forbidden, of course, and the world was in horror thanks to Time magazine. They were about to bomb us. They were starving. Both those countries, they wanted to trade with us. They wanted to look at new markets. And Norman was right at the forefront of that kind of thinking. How can we find the world? He was the Kennedy of the Pacific, really.
He also, Mr Tizard, he also introduced a great sense of nationalism, didn't he? He really introduced that.
Norm could verbalise his emotions in a way that nobody else I've known could do. I mean, in that initial entry where you see him with the little boy.
Yes, the little Maori boy on Waitangi.
At Waitangi Day. And it was an opportunity that Norm just took. And it appeared to be so natural, and yet when you knew Norm, you realise he was doing it with a wider purpose. And he had another method of getting attention to himself. Norm had a huge range of volume in his voice. And when he wanted people's attention, he dropped his voice to force them to listen. And he had a whole lot of methods like that you realised afterwards how he had carefully prepared the background.
Great orator. He held those big election meetings at a time when candidates had big election meetings in the town hall. They'd fill the town hall,
but on the other hand, he was also very vulnerable. Now, in the 1957-60 period, Walter Nash, as Prime Minister, decided that he would have an opportunity for the members' wives to come down to Wellington during the second term school holidays. And we were having a party in the room that Norm shared with Neville Pickering, another Christchurch member. And the opposition got a little bit annoyed that so many of our members were not sitting in the House. It was the government's job to maintain the quorum of 20. So the next thing we know, the division bells sound, and we didn't know whether it was a division. We only had a majority of one at that time. And everyone wanted to get up and go, and Norm couldn't. Norm was almost unconscious on the divan where he was lounging. And Kath had to look after him while the rest of us tore back up to the debating chamber to find it was only a quorum call and then start to filter back. But Kath mopped his brow. He couldn't speak. And Warren Frere ran over up to Hugh Watt, who was acting as leader of the House at the time, and said, look, we'll have to... no, the wrong way around. It would be Jerry Skinner at that time. We'll have to cut this off. Norm Kirk cannot get up to vote.
Yes.
And that formed a bond between Kath and Norm that was never broken. He was a confidant with her in a way that he never was with anybody else.
Dr. Hayward, this was an interesting time because there was all sorts of conspiracy theories going on. There was so much secrecy, and it was about this time that he went into hospital, wasn't it?
Oh, you're talking way back many years ago.
50s and
50s. Yes. What happened, conspiracy theories about how he died, and Bob, Harvey and I probably differ very much on this.
Yes, you do, don't you? There are some theories.
Yes.
There was all sorts of allegations that he was paranoid, that he was poisoned.
Yes. From my point of view in the office, he had a varicose vein operation on both legs, and we said to him we thought it was going to be 2 legs was too much, but his wife had both legs done very successfully, which he pointed out, and
She didn't weigh 30 stone.
He didn't then, though.
No, he did.
Not as Prime Minister. No. He lost a lot. Anyway. We won't go on. This is an argument, you see. And he went in and he got a clot, and that was never cleared up. And that's finally what he died of.
But Harvey, you disagree?
Look, I think the jury's out. I just see... I saw a fantastically healthy man deteriorate so quickly, and that's all I've kept the debate open on. I mean, on a world stage, he was a player. And an interesting player. And I spoke to Gough Whitlam about this afterwards. He was knocked out, of course, with a king hit by a guy Kerr over spy things, you know that. And I just thought that Norman was so robustly healthy, and Mike Moore and I both shared that grief because we were so fond of him and saw someone that we adored, to be honest, deteriorate so quickly, and we thought, what the hell? But anyway, I've kind of passed that. I'm an old man these days, you know.
Well, thank you all for your time. Very much appreciated. Bob Tizard, Dr. Margaret Hayward and Bob Harvey, thank you very much.
Thank you.